Hello, I'm your host, Grayson Brolte. Welcome to another episode of SAE Tomorrow Today, a show about emerging technology and trends in mobility with the leaders and innovators who make it all happen. On today's episode, we're absolutely honored to be joined by Steve Rober, Senior Vice President, Global Head of Automotive Research and Advanced Engineering, Stellantis. On today's episode, Steve discusses Stellantis' approach to the software-defined vehicle. We hope you enjoy this episode. Steve, welcome to the podcast.
Thank you. It's good to be on.
It's great to have you here. Point blank, Stellantis has great brands. I mean, you've got some of the most iconic brands in the world. You have Jeep, you have Dodge, you have Fiat, you have Maserati. Ronald Reagan was a very proud Maserati owner, both before presidency and after the presidency. So, Steve, to kick things off, you've got access to really cool toys. So how is Stellantis approaching new technologies that relates to R&D?
We're looking at, and that's a good point to bring up the brands, because we're looking across the brands and we're looking at the needs. And I tell people that we have everything from a Fiat 500 or a Citroen, at one end of the spectrum up to, like you said, the Maserati, even the Ram trucks. And it's amazing in the brands, a lot of them need the same basic components, the same basic technology. And a lot of them then diverge, because obviously what you need in a low-end Citroen, low-cost Citroen versus what you need in, an off-road Jeep or a Maserati are going to be different. But you try to commonize as much as you can, you prioritize, and then you also realize where you have the overlaps, because a lot of the user experience, really like in a high-end Jeep, is very similar to what you need in some of the high-end vehicles that you have, like even a Maserati. So again, you look for the commonizations, you try to build that common platform where possible, but then you differentiate based on the style and the demands of each of the brands.
When you say a common platform, is that what's called Stellantis operating system that will go across a variety of your brands? Then the Maserati team customizes theirs, the Jeep team customizes theirs. Is that how that works?
That's accurate. Is that what you have is you really have a base platform in terms of hardware, software, even a lot of the mechanicals that you can wherever possible. And then you have the specific tailoring that you need for each type of vehicle, whether it be Fiat, Jeep, whatever it's going to be. But then you also have to take it a step further in that, like on the user interfaces, you have different languages to deal with. So you not only have the brands, but you have the regional requirements for language and safety features and everything else. But again, it all comes back to building that base platform that can be shared as much as possible, and then expanding it and defining it individually for each of the vehicles as you need to.
So you're focused on research and advanced engineering, and we're having a lot of automotive breakthroughs, and one of the big ones is 4D radar, for example, is getting a lot of attention. So let's just say Stellantis agrees that you're going to deploy 4D radar. How do you determine what brand gets new technology before the other brand?
A lot of it is really what features each of the brands offer, because the 4D radar is a really good example, is that it's good technology. It reduces the cost of some of the systems that we have now. It's a cheaper way to do sensors versus like a LiDAR or something like that, but it also gives you more capability. Where you really need that capability is where you have the higher end feature sets, like you have a level 2 plus US style hands-free driving, or a level 3, or even as you get into level 4. So those vehicles that are equipped with those types of advanced systems will generally get that technology first. And then as you add volume, as you add capability, but drive down that cost, that's where some of the other vehicles will get it, because you've made it more available. You've put it on the premium systems first, but then you've made it more available for everyone else.
Do you put on the premium systems, and as the cost curve comes down, then you start to put it on some of the less premium brands?
Generally, yes, but not all the time, because there are times where you have a specific need for some of the technology, even at some of what you'd consider the lower cost or even the mid-range brands, that you have a specific requirement that they have to meet for safety. And that may be regional, because, for example, when you talk about the 4D radar, is that you have different requirements for safety in Europe than you do in the US. You have different requirements in China, South America. So you may actually have to fill a niche need. It's not always first on the premium brands.
How about let's take an iconic vehicle, the Dodge Ram.
Mm-hmm.
It has towing capability. So perhaps is there new towing technology or new hitch technology comes out that you'll put it in that brand first, and then perhaps go to the Jeep brand, since some of those have technology as well, or do they go to both of them at the same time?
It really depends on the vehicle cycle, the timing, but you pick one as the lead, whether it's the Jeep or the Ram. But also you have to determine what you're doing with each vehicle, because you're going to have a new hitch technology. You're going to have something like that monitors the trailer. For example, if it's autonomy, most of the autonomy is for the vehicle itself. Then you have to introduce the towing capability in with the autonomy. And you have to decide, all right, what's going to be your launch bed? Because you really don't want to launch everything at once on every vehicle. You want to learn from something on the advanced, you want to learn from your first application and then apply it.
You want to learn, and then on the other side, I'm harping a lot on the brands. You have very loyal customers that time and time again, they're getting a new Jeep. They perhaps have an old, I love the old CJ7s. Perhaps they have an older CJ7, and then same thing on the Ram side. How do you introduce this new technology while keeping the loyalty of what they're used to when they buy a Jeep? It's that certain feel, that certain drive, and the same on the Ram side.
Well, you don't really when you introduce a lot of the new technology, the goal is not to completely alter the experience of the driving and the brand itself. It's to augment it. It's to add on to it. Like autonomy is a great example. You can still drive your Jeep. Most people want to drive their Jeep. They don't want to just be a passenger in a totally self-driven vehicle all the time. They want the experience of driving it. But there are times when you're on the road that you want to just take your hands off the wheel and say, all right, drive for a little bit, give me some rest, things like that. You're in a traffic jam. So it's not about changing the experience of that vehicle. It's about using some of the technology that we're developing to augment that experience and make it better.
Okay, let's stay on the Jeep sense. You have the Wagoneer. It's a family vehicle. You can take a lot of adults or children in that. Is there an L2 Plus system in there today for highway driving?
We've announced we're going to be introducing one for that vehicle. I can't share the time frame with you, but the intention is that you have on the different vehicles that you have the level 2 driving, then you introduce the level 2 plus driving, and then at some point we even take it beyond and go to the 3, and then hopefully the level 4.
So Stellantis has a clear internal roadmap of where the company is hoping to go with autonomy?
Yes.
Okay, so I'm going to go back to brands now. You have all these iconic brands I said earlier. What strategic advantage does that give Stellantis, where you have all these iconic brands underneath one company?
Well, I mean, we've talked about this, and our CEO, Carlos Tavares, has talked about this many times, is that it gives you coverage across the market. We're not a niche player in certain areas of certain segments of the market. We have a broad set of brands that cover different people's needs, from basic transportation to, graduating to a little bit more comfort, luxury, the off-road capability, the trucks. We cover as much as we can, but also because of the nature of the company and all of the components that have put us together between Citroën, Peugeot, Opel, Fiat, Chrysler, Dodge, Jeep. We also have a broad geographic coverage. So not only do we cover the different segments, we cover the different geographies. But that also comes back to what I said earlier about the technology, is that a lot of the technology we develop has, broad applications, but then you have to have specific applications for that technology and specific implementations depending on the vehicle line and the geographic location where you're releasing it.
You mentioned Peugeot. I want to give a shout out to your engineers. In the 90s, you had the Peugeot station wagons here in America, and they were fantastic. It was a really great, fantastic vehicle. The glue that's going to hold all your brands together, as we alluded to earlier, is software. In your opinion, Steve, what does the future of software-defined vehicle look like to you?
One of the things I always say about when people talk about the software-defined vehicle, and it's a very important topic, but I always caveat that with, it's a software-defined vehicle if you have the hardware correct. If you try to take an existing electrical architecture that you had, where you have fully distributed control, every feature has got its own electronic control unit, and they really play together once you integrate the vehicle, you can't really have a software-defined vehicle. What you really have to do is change the way that you architect the vehicle so that you have more centralized software. The systems have much more interoperability to them, much more upgradability to them, and you also leave yourself a lot of headroom for future growth. It used to be, and it's still a traditional way to do it, is that you size like a memory, a microcontroller throughput based on the features that you're defining, and you leave yourself a little bit of headroom. The way that we're looking at the upgradability of the vehicle, the centralization of the software, the updates, everything else, you need to allow yourself more headroom and also have more of that software centralized and the hardware flexible to give you different features. And that lets you do this whole concept of the software-defined vehicle that everyone talks about.
You're going vertically integrated now.
Yes. We have actually taken much more control, and the semiconductor shortage really taught us a lot. And they were very painful lessons for us and everyone, is that you can't just rely on someone else to give you, basically what they want to use as their platform for microcontrollers, for other different chips. we've actually taken a lot of steps in the last couple of years and we've published what we call a green list, where we have a selection of microcontrollers that we want our suppliers to use rather than just using what they want to, so that we actually have more commonization in our vehicles. We actually can then work directly with the suppliers to say, here is our projected need. We source some of it directly. We also give them guidance much, farther out in time of what we think our volumes will be, so that we're not susceptible to any single disruption in the market. We actually have fewer suppliers. We consolidate that sourcing and work more directly with them to make sure that we have the supply that we need.
Is this one of the reasons that led the company? And it's a very, very smart, I give your board a lot of credit for this strategic decision, to jointly produce semiconductors with Foxconn. Is that one of the reasons why?
That's one of the reasons. There are a few reasons we've done it. One is the supply assurance, is that, again, we want to work directly with suppliers. And Foxconn is a very good partner on multiple fronts. We work with them on software development. We work with them on semiconductor development. But going back to semiconductors, they've actually had some experience in doing this. They are a good partner to work with. It gives us more control. It also lets us learn a lot more, that instead of working with someone, we're actually doing it with them. We have a joint venture to develop it with them. So we get much more exposure to even the supply base of the semiconductor industry. We specify a lot more of the direct design. So it actually gives us a lot more working. And it's not just Foxconn. We have other partners. We're looking at doing some of this too, but not to that level with Foxconn. But with Foxconn as well, what we're really trying to do is say, all right, it's a supply assurance issue, but also if you look at the electrical architecture, and I alluded to, you can do a software-defined vehicle if you have the right electronics. So much of the electronics that we use, the microcontrollers, they're just new generations of the same types of things. To do a software-defined vehicle, you need more flexibility in how that input-output structure works, the amount of memory, everything else. And a lot of what we use at the higher end, these system on chips, as you talk about for infotainment, a lot of the companies that we deal with are used to doing consumer products, and they're bringing it into automotive. Whereas as we get into more advanced infotainment, as we get into the data movement inside and outside of the car, and especially on autonomy, we need to take more control of how those chips are even architected and designed to make sure that they're specifically for our purpose. We have enough volume to drive that, rather than reusing things that other people thought they would need and trying to reintroduce those into the automotive market.
This could be your Apple M chip moment. When Apple introduced the ARM-based M chips, the performance of the MacBooks went through the roof, power consumption went down, and it's a great product.
Very good analogy. I'm spot on analogy. That's really exactly the type of path that we're looking at doing.
I have several Apple M chip products, and the performance has gone through the roof. Are you expecting to see the same thing from a massive performance increase, both from a vehicle standpoint, but then also from an infotainment experience as well?
Oh yes. I mean, if you look at traditionally the vehicles, once they started to be, have more of the electronic control units, year on year, maybe you would need, 10% more throughput in memory than you needed the year before. Each generation of the chips, every 3 to 5 years, you may get 50% more. Those numbers are out the window. You need a lot more performance. You need a lot more capability, memory, and, as I said, room for expansion. And that's a very good way to look at it, is that, that M chip viewpoint, because we need to add on to it. We need to really more focus what we're doing. But as I said, right now, because we're using chips that were really intended for other markets in many cases, there's a lot of that silicon on the chip that we don't even use for specific application. Once we start developing and specifying the chips for our application, we get a lot better utilization on the chip. We get better power management. Overall, it's actually a much better experience for the customer, because we define what we need, we implement, and it works better for us to implement those technologies, and it's much better for the customer because those technologies are implemented in a way where they can make use of it.
And then over time, will Stellantis look for an over-the-air update program as you develop new technologies and you get them automotive grade? They pass certification, you'll push them out to your vehicles?
Yes, very much. I mean, that's very standard in the industry now, is that as you re-architect, and again, I go back to the way that the electronic architecture was, there were a lot of modules that you just couldn't do over-the-air updates. So there's a lot of features that are interoperable between the modules. And if you could do an over-the-air update on one module but not the other, you couldn't do the feature. As we go farther and do the software-defined vehicles, the over-the-air updates are key, because then what you want to do is not only convenience for the customer of improving features or adding new features, but you can actually take care of the whole vehicle from a strategy and the architecture standpoint. You can do it all through the over-the-air updates instead of only being able to do pieces of it.
Stellantis has been very public. You led a very public roadmap around electrification, and you're putting new features and functions into the vehicle. I think about power consumption a lot. So how do you balance these new features with the demand for the power consumption to make the vehicle go from point A to point B?
We've actually been talking to some of the players in the PC industry about that, because they've actually had a lot of experience as they go from desktop to laptop of how do you do power management? Because the way that most vehicles work now, everything is on all the time. Especially as you start to electrify, you really want to save on that power consumption. So you start to look at the features in the vehicle, that what needs to be on all the time. Obviously, the safety features do, but there are certain things that you can look at and say, okay, do we power down this feature for a period of time, as long as we can power it back up quickly and get a good response? But that also changes the architecture of the vehicle, which right now, with the traditional architecture, you really can't do. But as you go forward and improve your electrical architectures, you can put in features like that for power savings.
That's really neat. Where did the inspiration come from to talk to the laptop community? Because it's really smart and neat.
Actually, we had some of the startups and some of the traditional companies come to us. And this was announced even at CES, is that Intel is taking some of that technology into the automotive market. They're one of the companies that we have been working with and are really starting to work with in more detail, because, again, they have a lot of experience on this. And as we're working in automotive, we've had our traditional supplier base that we've used for technology. As you reach out to some of these new players or people who have been sort of in and out of the automotive market, there's a lot that they can bring to the market, bring to the auto designs based on things they've learned somewhere else. And this is a prime example of that.
I like that. You have to learn. That's the whole key to building a great product, in my opinion, is learning from multiple disciplines. You can learn somebody that understands nuclear fusion. Okay, well, it's something that you might have grabbed a piece from this or a piece of that. So Intel is no longer a startup. They're a very large publicly traded company. But you go out and you engage with the startup community. How is Stellantis engaging with the startup community? Let's say pre-seed, Series A, those younger, smaller companies that have a really big idea.
We've actually been taking a couple of different approaches on this. One is we directly invest in a lot of these companies, a lot of the startups, that we do capital investments, we get a board seat, et cetera. It gives them access to our technology. There's also companies that we go out that we choose not to invest in, but we do projects. We seed some project money with them so that they can look at applying their technology to one of our problems. So we've done that with small companies, mid companies. What we're also doing is, when you talk about startup companies, everyone in the US thinks Silicon Valley. But you have to really take a global approach to this, that there are companies in Europe, there's companies in the US. There's actually, a lot of people don't realize that there's a good ecosystem in parts of Canada that do this, which as an American, you don't think of Canada, but they are. And I no disrespect to anyone, but they've got a lot of good startups there. There's also a lot of startup technology, for example, in South America that has been overlooked. That is really, there's a lot of good engineering talent in these different parts of the world that we're really trying to incorporate into this ecosystem and use.
Thank you for highlighting global. There's really great startups. I've seen some out of Italy. There's some out of France, and there's a lot in South America. It's going to be interesting to see where Argentina goes with the new president. Well, how do you engage with some of these companies? So France has Vive la Tech, which is a big showcase for French startups, and the French government gets behind it along with LVMH. But some of these smaller developing nations do not have that support, but they have really great companies. Especially you go into Brazil, or you go into Ecuador, for example. How are you finding them? Do you have a scout network? Is it just relationships, or how are you finding these companies?
Both, actually. We have formal mechanisms for looking at these companies, but we also very much rely on our local ecosystems. We have a good engineering presence in South America that reaches out to these people to evaluate what they have, the same type of thing. We've looked at different places in North Africa, in South Africa. Obviously, there are things in Asia that we have traditionally looked at, but there's new areas popping up in Asia that have really sort of been overlooked before, that we're trying to tap into a little bit more. So again, we're really utilizing our local teams. We've got formal and informal processes of looking at this. using our internal teams, using some external sources. But again, we're trying to make a much more global approach to this than we have before.
Global approach gives you great ideas. You might uncover a new idea or a new technology that if you just focused on this little area, you wouldn't have done that. When you're out there, so let's say scouring the world for new technology, new ideas, new inspirations, what are you looking for?
We have specific needs in the company. Like you can always look at the sort of standard, the three things, the three pillars that you always look for: autonomy, electrification, and communication. Okay, and then infotainment, communication, things like that. But you also, when you evaluate these companies, you look at a couple of different things. What are they doing differently? Are they a one-off of something that other people have done? I remember it was like 10 years ago. Everybody was doing things with dongles in the car to plug in and collect data from the car. And I can't tell you how many different companies approached us about they had a slightly different approach. Whereas now you have a lot of people who have different approaches to cybersecurity. And you have to look at, okay, are you another one-off where you had people coming out of the military, they've all studied the same things? Or do you have a fundamentally different approach that maybe we can use? You also have to look at, are these people that are just doing lab projects, or do they have ideas about how to integrate their technology into the vehicle? Because a great idea is a great idea, but it's kind of worthless if you can't make it work and integrate it into the largest solutions that we have. And then it's a combination of, are the people ready to do that? And is the technology ready to do that?
Let's stay on the people track here. You hit the nail on the head and you went to a big pet peeve of mine. You can have the world's greatest technology, but if they don't want to run this business, it's not going to succeed. You can't make an argument to your board of why you want to invest or work with this company. And they're like, no, we don't really care. It's not going to work. How much do you weigh in that when you're meeting with these founders or you're meeting with these early stage companies, and do you ask them point blank, we're a global OEM. We want to commercialize this. Do you want to commercialize or no before you even waste your time?
A little more complex than that. I mean, because they'll always say yes. Of course, they want to sell it and they want to make money. But the question is, when you deal with these startups, do they have experience in commercializing it? Do they have a plan on how to commercialize it? Or in many cases, do they have a partner? Some cases, we can integrate technology from these startups directly. In some cases, we encourage them to work with more of a traditional automotive tier one, because they've actually shown some benefits of they would integrate the startup technology into what they're doing, and they're the bridge for us. But there's a bunch of different ways, but you have to make an honest assumption about, is that technology going to be integrated, and can it be integrated with the tech and the people that are brought forward in these startups?
The three things you look for, as you mentioned: autonomy, electrification, communication. When you're out there, do you have certain brands in mind? Well, hey, we're kind of looking for this brand or this for that brand, or is it a whole Stellantis approach?
It's a whole Stellantis approach, but there are different things. Again, regionally for communications, you may have slightly different standards. As you go for electrification, is a good example that there are different levels of battery technology that you deal with, and a lot of it is the materials that you use, the energy density of the batteries themselves, the cost of the batteries. So you look for a global solution, but again, I mentioned earlier, there are some niche solutions that you have to look for depending on the applications and the brand. And we do look for some different things in there too.
When you're looking at battery tech, this is well documented, well reported. Benchmark Minerals, Financial Times, Wall Street Journal. We can go down the line here. Supply chain around batteries, access to the refineries, access to the mines. How much does that supply chain, when you're evaluating potentially battery technology company, do you look to see if they have a secure enough supply chain as part of that due diligence process?
That is one part of it, yes. Obviously, the base thing we look at is the battery tech that they're bringing forward, whether it's solid state battery, whether it's reducing critical elements in that battery. Those are all critical. But again, we do look that is part of what we look at is, do you have a secure supply? Or in our case, do we have to secure that? If we integrate that technology, do we then have to secure that supply ourselves?
Wow. So that's fascinating. How is Stellantis securing supply? Do you have a whole supply team that's all they do is they look and they manage this all the time, and then they give you feedback based on what you're seeing in the startup community?
I wouldn't say it's a completely separate team. I mean, obviously, as part of what we do with our materials management, we've made an announcement where we have looked at mines, we have done these joint ventures with battery companies, and then the battery companies themselves actually secure the supply. So again, it's not a special group, it's not a special thing. it's part of the culture now. You have to look at this, and we're talking about battery, securing battery chemistry, battery supplies, raw minerals. We're securing semiconductors the same way. There's a lot of things that we've learned in the last couple of years on supply securitization that we have to pay a lot more attention to.
And since Stellantis has a very large presence in the EU, are you going down with the EU battery regulations and going into the tracking mechanisms and looking at startups that interact in that to potentially integrate it into your overall operations?
Yeah, we have to. That's a good point. We've talked a lot about technology, but there are also obviously local regulations, local laws that you have to take into account about where you're getting the supplies, with the technology you're using. Obviously, it's part of the job is to make sure you're fully compliant with all of those regional requirements. Yes.
So what am I missing? Because it seems in our conversation, you've got the whole big picture here of where you're really trying to go as a brand as you lean into the future.
We hope we have the big picture, but you're always learning. There's always things that are popping up. There's always new technology. The job is never done. I mean, it's things we've learned a lot. We're still learning a lot. We're on the journey, for software-defined vehicle, for electrification. We started the journey. We're well into it. The journey's not over. There's a lot to learn yet, and there's still a lot more to apply.
Going down that journey, I'm not going to give a timeline on this, but just going down a journey, will it look to incorporate more electrification, more autonomy, more connectivity? Are those going to be the three trends that you see for the foreseeable future that you're going to look for?
The main three. There's always other trends that are going to come along. Obviously, we're talking about technology. There's net zero emissions in manufacturing process. There is fully renewables and recycling of the vehicles, all of that. There's all of those things that are associated with it too. Yes.
Well, let's put this all together. In your opinion, Steve, what is the future of Stellantis?
From my perspective, a lot of the future is actually very bright for us because, again, we've got a good global presence. We've got a good brand coverage. We're investing in the technologies that we need to. As I said, there's a lot more work to do, but we've taken a lot of the first steps and a lot of the second steps on this, and we've made a lot of public comments about where we want to be for electrification, connectivity, autonomy. We are executing on that plan, and we're executing well.
Not only that, you're making great products that your customers love, and that is the key. You can have the world's greatest product, but if your customers don't like it, you don't have anything. And you're making products that your customers love. Steve, as we look to wrap up this insightful conversation, what would you like our listeners to take away with them today?
The main thing is as I've said, we've started this journey on the different technology. We don't want to alter fundamentally, and Jeep, go back to a Jeep as a good example. We don't want to alter the experience of driving a Jeep. We want to augment it with the new technologies, whether it be autonomy, electrification, more connectivity. And Jeep is the one example I use. As an American, you always talk about Jeep when you work for Stellantis. But globally, there's other products, the Maseratis, the Fiats, the Peugeots. We're making sure that all of this technology augments the experience that the user gets. And it makes it a more enjoyable, more relaxing, more safe experience for everyone. And obviously a more green experience as we move towards electrification.
It enhances the experience, it increases the safety, and it increases the stickiness. It's a win-win-win all around. You have happy customers who love your products, who feel safe driving your products, eventually be ridden around in your products. Today is tomorrow. Tomorrow is today. The future is Stellantis. Steve, thank you so much for coming on SAE Tomorrow Today.
Thank you very much for having me.
Thank you for listening to SAE Tomorrow Today. If you've enjoyed this episode and would like to hear more, please kindly rate, review, and let us know what topics you'd like for us to explore next. Be sure to join us next week to hear about GKN's unveiling of a new plug-and-play e-drive concept and how it can meet the growing demand for electric vehicles.
SAE International makes no representations as to the accuracy of the information presented in this podcast. The information and opinions are for general information only. SAE International does not endorse, approve, recommend, or certify any information, product, process, service, or organization presented or mentioned in this podcast.